When the priest finishes the last prayer after the epistle, he joins his hands and goes to the center of the altar. The server, meanwhile, transfers the missal. At the center of the altar, the priest first lifts his eyes up to the cross. He then makes a profound bow over the altar, keeping his hands joined at the breast. He now recites the Munda Cor Meum in the quiet voice, followed immediately by the Iube Domine Benedicere and the Dominus Sit in Corde Meo. The priest then straightens, turns, and goes to the missal on the gospel side. He faces the missal, standing at an angle to the altar, and with joined hands says in the loud voice,
Dominus vobiscum.
He then signs the gospel text by placing his left hand flat on the missal, while the right thumb makes a small sign of the cross on the first few words of the text of the gospel itself. He places his left hand on his breast and makes 3 small signs of the cross on himself, first the forehead, then lips, and breast. These signs of the cross are made as he says the words,
Sequentia Sancti Evangelii secundum Ioannem.
Gloria tibi, Domine.
In illo tempore dixit Iesus turbis Iudeorum, nunc edicium est mundi, nunc princeps huius mundi edicietur foras. Regos di exaltatus fuero et terra, omnia traham ad me ipsum. Hocatum dicebat significans quam morte esse moriturus. Respondit ei turbas.
The Gospel is read in the loud voice with hands joined at the breast. If the holy name is mentioned, the priest makes a low head bow towards the missal.
Dixit ergo eis Iesus, ad hoc modicum lumen vobis est, ambulante dum lumcium habetis, ut non vos tenebrae comprehendant.
At the conclusion of the Gospel, the priest lifts the book and kisses the place where he signed it, as he says in the quiet voice, Per evangelica dicta deleantur nostra delicta. The server responds,
Laus tibi, Christe.
The priest then moves both book and missal stand to the center. The missal should be placed at a comfortable angle for the priest to read the offertory and prayers of the canon. It should be close to, but not resting on, the corporal. He then begins the creed.
Credo in unum Deum, Patrum omnipotentem, factorem caeli et...
The creed is always said on Sundays and first-class feasts. With the exception of some second-class feasts, it usually does not occur during weekday masses. The liturgical ordo will always tell you when a creed is to be said. At the first verse, the priest elevates his hands in a small circle in the same manner as he did at the Gloria, and makes a low head bow at the word Deum. He recites the creed in the loud voice with hands joined at the breast. He makes a low head bow at the holy name and the simul adoratur. At the verse Et incarnatus est de Spiritu Sancto ex Maria Virgine et homo factus est, he genuflects with his hands on the altar. At the last verse, the priest makes the sign of the cross.
Credo in unum Deum, Patrum omnipotentem, factorem caeli et terrae, visibilium omnium et invisibilium, et in unum Dominum Iesum Christum, Filium Dei unigenitum, et ex Patre natum ante omnia saecula, Deum de Deo, lumen de lumine, Deum verum de Deo vero, genitum non factum consubstantialem Patri, perquem omnia facta sunt, qui propter nos homines et propter nostrum salutem, descendit de celis, et incarnatus est de Spiritu Sancto ex Maria Virgine, et homo factus est. Crucifixus etiam pro nobis sub Pontio Pilato, passus et sepultus est, et resurrexit tertia die secundum Scripturas, et ascendit in caelum sede de dexterum Patris, et iterum venturus est cum gloria judicare vivos et mortuos, cuius regni non et finis, et in Spiritum Sanctum Dominum et vivificantem, qui ex Patre Filioque procedit, qui cum Patre et Filio simo adoratur et conglorificatur, qui locutus est per prophetas, et unam sanctum catholicam et apostolicae ecclesiam, confitior unum baptismum remissionem peccatorum, et expecto resurrectionem mortuorum, et vitam venturi seculi. Amen.
When he finishes the creed, he immediately places both hands flat on the altar outside the corporal and kisses the altar. He turns around to face the people, separates and rejoins his hands as he says,
Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu
He turns
tuo.
back around the same way, separates and rejoins his hands as he makes a low head bow to the cross and says.
Oremus.
He then begins the offertory antiphon in the loud voice.
Plebam tuum per signium sancte crucis.
The offertory of the Mass begins with the offertory antiphon, which is read from the Missal in the loud voice. All the other prayers of the offertory are said in the quiet voice. Since the priest must perform many actions while saying these prayers, they must either be memorized or read from the altar card.
Oremus. Procede Domine plebam tuum per signium sancte crucis ab omnibus insidiis inimicorum omnium, ut tibi gratum exhibiamus servitutem et acceptabile fiat sacrificium nostrum. Alleluia.
After he finishes the offertory antiphon, he takes the rear corners of the chalice veil and removes the veil from the chalice. He then folds the chalice veil, which he lays on the epistle side of the altar. Or he may hand it to the server, and the server can fold the veil. The priest then lays his left hand on the altar, takes the chalice with the right, and sets it to the epistle side. He uncovers the chalice and sets the pall aside, leaning it against the back of the altar or the altar card. He then takes the paten with the right hand and brings it to the center over the corporal. His left hand meets the paten in the center, and holding the paten with both hands at the level of his breast, he lifts his eyes up to the cross and then immediately lowers them. He then begins the prayer, Suscipe Sancte Pater. The paten should be held at the edges with the thumb and forefinger of both hands. The other 6 fingers should be underneath the paten with the fingertips touching. The priest should keep his eyes fixed on the host for the entire duration of this prayer. When he says the Amen at the end of the prayer, he lowers the paten to a few inches above the corporal and makes the sign of the cross over the place where he will lay the host. He then tilts the paten towards the center and slides the host onto the corporal at the center of the crease nearest him. The left hand is laid on the altar, and the right hand slides the paten halfway underneath the middle of the corporal on the epistle side. He takes the chalice in the left hand, and with the right hand he wipes out the inside with the purificator and goes to the epistle corner. He places the purificator in the thumb of the left hand and drapes it against the side of the chalice, holding the chalice in the left hand just below the cup. The priest then takes the wine cruet from the server and pours in a sufficient amount of wine, enough that he can conveniently drink it in one swallow. The server presents the water cruet, which the priest blesses as he begins the prayer, Deus qui humane substantiae. He infuses a few small drops of water into the wine as he says the words, Per huius aquae et vini mysterium. It is customary in many places for the priest to make a slight head bow to the server after returning the cruet in recognition of his service. The priest then takes the purificator with the index finger of the right hand and wipes out any stray drops of water from the inside of the chalice. He then sets the chalice near the corporal with the left hand. With the purificator still in his right hand, he joins his hands and finishes the prayer, making a low head bow at the words, Jesus Christus. The priest then goes to the center, lays the purificator over the exposed part of the paten, with the open folds towards the back and the cross facing himself. He takes the chalice with the right hand and brings it to the center over the corporal, where the left hand meets the chalice at the base. He raises the chalice and recites the entire prayer, Oferimus tibi, with his eyes lifted up to the cross. At the end of the prayer, he lowers the chalice to a few inches above the corporal and makes the sign of the cross over the place where he will lay the chalice. The right hand takes the pall and covers the chalice. Any time the priest covers and uncovers the chalice, The left hand is laid at the base to steady it. The priest then joins his hands and lays them on the altar as he makes a medium bow of the body, and in this position he recites the prayer in spiritu humilitatis. Afterwards, he immediately says the prayer, Veni Sanctificator. The Veni Sanctificator is a short prayer which consists of several different movements. When the priest says the words, Veni Sanctificator omnipotens aeterne Deus, he separates, elevates, and rejoins his hands in a small circle, as he did for the Gloria and Creed, only this time he also lifts his eyes up to the cross. At the words Et benedic hoc sacrificium, he places his left hand on the altar and blesses both the chalice and host together with the right hand. He then joins his hands and says the remainder of the prayer, Tuo sancto nomine preparatum. He then goes to the epistle corner for the lavabo. After the priest blesses the oblata at the Veni Sanctificator, he goes to the epistle corner for the lavabo. He recites the lavabo psalm as the server pours water over the thumb and forefinger of both hands. The priest dries his hands on the lavabo towel, after which he may bow to the server who departs. He then finishes the psalm facing the altar card with hands joined.